Welcome back to the HLG podcast, episode number 4. In this highly anticipated episode, for the first time ever in horticultural LED lighting, we welcome our Samsung partners, Brock and Ash, along with the CEO of HLG, Steve Johnson. Welcome, guys.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to be here.
This episode does have the potential to get a little technical and a little dense. We'll absolutely try our best to define terms whenever possible, but you might want to have Google or a dictionary out on this one, guys. But let's start out with kind of the history of how Samsung entered the horticulture market. What were you all primarily making prior to this LED revolution, back when everyone was running HPS lighting in the grow rooms?
Well, our focus was mostly on, general lighting.
General lighting, okay.
With what we call as EPIAP 5630 devices.
Okay.
5.0 cross, 3.0 millimeters. That's the dimension of the chip when I say 5630.
Okay, and our viewers would know that as the 561B series.
That is correct.
The B, C, C+. Yeah.
And that's what you and Amit started with that. Original OG
that is
quantum
correct.
boards.
Yep.
So
And
that product was used in general lighting.
in general lighting, as a matter of fact, it was also used by HLG, as you mentioned. So we didn't really have a specific horticulture-based LED before that. And then we started, talking with HLG, Steve and Amit, and in 2017, actually, one of the things that we talked about was the chip scale package, which is the CSP, which will probably be used in the future. But me and Steve and Amit, we talked about it in 2017, like 5 years ago, which uses a flip chip technology.
Okay. Okay. Flip chip. Now, this is something that it's been around for a while, right? Mm-hmm. What's the difference between a flip chip and a chip-on-board LED? Because many people have grown with cobs or chip-on. In fact, growers are the only people that say cobs. Everybody says COB, but I think cob sounds.
Sure.
It's like whatever. So what's the difference between a flip chip and a chip-on-board?
Sure. So flip chip is a more efficient device to start with, just on layman terms. But if you want to deep dive into the LED, cob or COB has a bunch of chips. In fact, it goes from 3 watt all the way up to 80 watt on a single LED, and it throws out a lot of lumens. If you look at the 80 watt, it has more than 288 individual chips inside, and each chip has 2 bond wires for the positive and the negative terminal. Right? So it's
kind of like a quantum board today, but shrunken down into a little ceramic wafer and wire, itty-bitty wire still connecting like a circuit board.
That is correct.
Okay.
Just like
What's the downside of something like that with all those wire bonds and stuff?
Yeah. So first of all, the heat, because you put in a lot of LEDs inside, a lot of chips inside, and each chip has bond wires. So in environments where there's, fluctuation in temperature, for example, you're installing it somewhere outside and it gets cold, it gets hot, it changes in temperature. If you zoom in to the LED, which is the COB, and you look at the individual bond wires, they expand and contract.
Okay.
It's called coefficient of thermal expansion. And that puts a lot of stress into those LEDs, and that makes the bond wires vulnerable. So, like you mentioned, there's a lot of strings in the 288, right? So they are in series, so it only takes one wire to break for the whole string to go out.
Right.
So do you really want that? I'm not saying COB is a bad device, but as far as horticulture applications concerned, you need something more reliable, like a flip chip, which does not have that bond wire. Okay. So it is like a piece of cake flipped over, right? And it has icing in the bottom. The icing acts as a conductor. That's how the current flows. You're flipping the cake, right? It does not have wires on the side. So you're essentially eliminating one of the weak points in an LED.
Okay.
Right?
And so are the 561 and the 3030s that we're using now, are they flip chips or what is it?
So
who's using flip chips? What product is a flip chip?
Flip chip, what HLG is using now is mostly flip chip. Okay. And when we talked about 5630, 5.6 cross 3.0 in the beginning of the show, that was what we call as an EPIAP. So Again, another term for the viewers, just to help you understand, epi-up is basically taking the COB, taking one chip and then putting it into an LED instead of several chips with several bond wires, right?
Okay.
So it's not essentially the same as the COB. It's just this is just one chip and one LED. It's better for thermal management,
Okay.
And you have to populate a lot of them on a board. But again, it does have that crucial bond wire, right?
Okay.
So when we talked about it in 2017, HLG was looking for something more reliable. So we decided to go down the 301B route, which is a 3.0 cross 3.0 millimeter with what we call a flip chip die. And if you look at the LED from the top, you cannot see any bond wires.
Right.
So that is one of the biggest plus points of our 3030s being used in the horticulture environment. You're
Okay.
eliminating
And so
that.
prior to Steve and Amit reaching out about the 3030 or the 301B, that I think everybody knows about the 301B now because every frickin' person from eBay to Amazon to all the way up to HLG says, oh, exclusive Samsung top bin, 301Bs or 301H. And I've got to ask you the difference between 301B and 301H in a minute. I'm trying to keep this show like a tree trunk. And we just went off on a flip chip branch. So let's come back to the main trunk really quick. So when you guys reached out about the 301, was that something y'all were already making for flashlights or screw-in light bulbs? Was it already in manufacture? Or what was the status of that product?
Yes and no. So it was in manufacturing only for the lighting market
Okay.
because lighting market was fixated on efficacy.
Right,
Right?
which is
lumen per
lumens.
watt.
Okay.
Lumen per watt. So
And at the time, your data sheets were specifically for the human eye, lumens, foot candles, whatever metric you use. Okay.
Exactly. So we looked at it, and because of the reliability aspect of it, Steve and Amit, they wanted to look at it, and we sampled them. And that lumen per watt, we were leading at that point of time. We're around like 210 to 215 lumen per watt with the 301B. That when they tested it, that kind of translated into a high performing LED in terms of PPF and PPE, which is the horticulture equivalent for lumens and efficacy in the general lighting. And that was our path forward from transitioning to a 5630 epi-up with the bond wire to a 301B or 301H, which we'll talk about in a minute, to a 3030 device.
Okay. So in other words, the product it existed, it had gone through R&D, but it wasn't, being widely distributed or even being requested by customers.
So it wasn't established in the horticulture market.
So
There
I
were
guess-
customers testing it.
Yeah.
But HLG was one of the customers who actually went ahead and implemented it.
So HLG discovered the 301Bs that you're welcome.
Yeah, for horticulture, I'm pretty sure we were the first ones to use them. I think.
Is that a fair statement?
I would say yes. They were one of the first ones to use them. There were other people looking at it and testing it. Nobody wanted to if you will pull the trigger to bring it into the market. So HLG has been very helpful in bringing that to the horticulture market as and promoting it as a high performing LED.
Yeah, and now you guys have sold a crap ton of them. I would imagine like billions of this diode, would you think? Like 301B, 301H? I mean,
Just
because if
billions?
you're ordering a million something and there's 1,000 customers, that'd be billions sold, right?
I mean, it feels like McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
Is it billions
A
sold?
billion
Yeah.
sold every day.
I'm sure it's billions.
There was a time where I remember, it was very difficult as a inventor, a prototyper. I'll call myself a maker. I think that term's pretty widely recognized now. To go into a data sheet from any manufacturer, Samsung or any of your contemporaries, and find useful data to photosynthesis, right? Who applied the pressure, or when did you make that metamorphosis or whatever into supporting this market? And can you walk me through like when you guys identified like, hey, we got something here. These guys want to buy a lot of LEDs to grow plants.
Right. It was a long road, honestly. It was one of those things where we were so entrenched in the general lighting market that really horticulture lighting wasn't on our radar. And so it was on us really to kind of communicate the message over to headquarters of, hey, there's a lot of folks over here that are looking at growing plants, believe it or not, with LEDs. It's one of those things that doesn't really translate. You know, like, don't you have sun? Like, what's the problem? What are you needing to grow? Like, what's the entire culture here of indoor growing? It's one of those things that doesn't necessarily translate. So it was a long road of research, development, and really tinkering with the spectrums. So for the original 3030 301B, it was really more of a lucky mistake that our phosphor recipe just so happened to.
And what is phosphor? It's the
So-
yellow stuff on the.
Yep.
Right.
So yeah, so when you look at an LED, you have a blue dye, which is like
They're all blue, royal blue, like
Yeah,
this
yep,
bar
yep.
and this bar.
Underneath the yellow.
450 -ish.
450-ish nanometer, which is constant, right? That pretty much we use the same dye on all the flip chip 3030 devices on the 301B. But what's different is the yellow stuff on top of it, which is like filter, where we change the phosphor recipe to change the appearance of the light. And that's where the CCT comes in, from 27 to 65. And Steve has been, he's mastered the technology of mixing CCTs and trying to get to the best possible spectrum.
And I guess that's another big advantage over the chip-on boards, because with the chip-on boards, which I kind of made my name building lights that had COBs. And it was very easy. You had a positive and a negative, and you could string them together with some wire from Home Depot and some metal and stuff. But you couldn't really go much custom like you were doing beyond the 3K, 4,000, 3,500 Kelvin, et cetera, et cetera. And that, I think most people are aware, obviously the lower the number, the yellower, right? And then the higher the number, the bluer. In fact, when I used to do saltwater aquariums, we would use 20,000 Kelvin metal halide bulbs to simulate the light deep under the ocean, where all the red light gets filtered out, the deeper you are. Anyway, so what was it, first of all, Steve, that you were doing COBs, you were doing chip on board with Johnson grow lights, right? And you had something there, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. In fact, I even built a light to kind of mimic yours for the dude and Scotty. But what was it about this Samsung thing that you knew was like the ticket? Like I mean, it was an innovation. You knew it was going to be the future.
Well, I mean, so I'm just kind of a geek, that.
Yeah.
So I'm scouring the internet and I'm looking at different things, and I'm like, so once you really add up the COB LEDs are for general lighting too, right? So stage lights, different things like that. So you start looking at the data sheets and look at the lumens per watt, and basically how we used to have to do it is Amit made a spreadsheet up that would use Planck's constant, and we would enter in each the intensity to the fourth decimal at every nanometer, right? And then that would we would digitize the spectrum, and he would use some tool that from digitizing the spectrum we could enter that in and get the micromoles per joule. So it just so happened in reality I looked at a lot of different brands, and the 5630 561C had just came out. The B and the B plus were really proliferant. Everybody was using B at the time, and a few people had jumped to the B plus, but C was just like this new cutting edge thing when we grabbed onto it. And I told Amit, I said, I really think this 5630 right here is going to be the ticket. And Amit's response is, I said, we can put these on a board. I think this is going to be the ticket. And he's like, no, you have to use COBs because they're more concentrated in the penetrating power. And I'm sitting there looking, and I'm like, no, because think of light as a volume of something like a bucket of water. Just because it's concentrated here isn't really changing your canopy penetration. A matter of fact, if you think about it, you have one point source, the sun's a point source. You walk outside, you have a shadow. So if you walk into a Home Depot and there's lights everywhere, you'll notice a lot of mini shadows. So the more point sources you have, the more chances that a photon is going to slip into the canopy, is the way I like to think about it, because multiple beam angles. So I said, I think this quantum board idea is going to be the way to go, which at the time wasn't named quantum board. But so we started working with Aero Electronics, and they had this program to where if you had an invention that they would R&D it with you. And so we were working with a guy, it's Ken Sanchez, and I think he may still actually be there today. And so we designed this quantum board, and we actually designed it. If you look at the originals and all the 288s, there's actually these optic lines. So we designed them around the Liddell Florence series optics. And it turned out that we didn't need them, but so I put the original 304 had 114 volts DC, which in my mind, I was looking at all the different drivers back then because there were no programmable drivers. So I tried to find something that was universal that I could put two boards in series or three boards in series and make it work in a line, because my original fixture was a line. The original one was three boards in a series. Okay. And it was 320H, maybe 1400 or something.
So I think you might have already answered my next question, which was going to be why Samsung. But so you spreadsheeted out. I mean, there's a lot of manufacturers of mid-power diodes, LG, Nichia, Philips, et cetera. So you spreadsheet them all out and said, Samsung's the winner.
Yeah, Samsung was the winner. The Nichia, they got something called. I remember the
757 was kind of close.
Yeah, they had the V1 F1, which was their top, but the price difference, Samsung just murdered them on price.
Okay.
And then. And they were still slightly ahead in performance on top of that. I'm like, well, it's a little less money and it's more performance. Sounds like a winner to me. And so we built a few. So that project, we were building the entire fixture. Yeah. Well, Arrow done something and ended that program right in the middle, and they just stopped production. They said, we'll hand you all the files, but your project's done. I can't remember her name. Her name was Patty Hershey, maybe, was working on the project with us with Ken Sanchez.
By name, huh?
Oh, well, she's still in the industry, and she texts me every now and again and says, how's it going, Steve? She's like, I see you guys are still doing great. I'm very proud of you, because she really believed in what I saw back then. So they gave us the files, and I think I sent off to China because, volume was, I'm not doing this out of pocket, volume was low, so I think we had no idea. I think we ordered 50 boards.
Yep.
I think it was 50 boards, and I got them in, and I mean, it had to be, I'd like to have a film of myself open that box, because it was like a kid on Christmas. I was like, oh my God, I got to get one of these lit up so I get it out on the counter.
Technology angle, it's like opening up the first flux capacitor or something.
Yeah. So I light it up, and I'm like, oh my God, I called Amit, and I said, Amit, you can't believe this. And he's like, oh yeah. I was like, I'm sending you one right now. So I sent him some. This is the brightest thing I've ever seen. I was like, I told you, dude. And then that was, because back then, there wasn't anything that bright per watt. Nothing even close. And it just, and I knew we were onto something. So I gave Captain Morgan on the forums some, and he run them, and you got some, and we gave them to kind of some of the best growers that were well known that we knew, because I trusted them. I'd talk to him on the phone some at this point, talk to Captain Morgan on the phone. I'm like, I value your opinion. And all I got back was, holy crap. And so I was like, let's make 500 on it. And this is, getting into our little, at the time, credit card and a little bit of savings over here is what the whole company started with in our basements, so every nickel counted. You can believe that, and sure enough, man, it took off. And I remember we finally got our Shopify, and I think we got in, maybe it was 500 boards or something like that, and we sold out in like 2 minutes or something crazy. But then the big one was I think we got in the first 2,000 when we went. So from there, I built like 500 in China, and I really wanted to do it in the U.S. Always have been kind of that guy. And at the time, and Scott, he's been here 1,000 times. Eat dinner with his family. His kid's a killer motocross rider. But Scott Hanoud worked for Future Electronics, and that's who we went through for the first 10,000 quantum boards with the company Pinnacle Technologies Group up in Michigan, Chicago, outside of Chicago, Illinois, and they built the first 10,000, and Amit's like, Steve, this PO it's in the millions, and he's like, this will run us, and I'm like, we got to do it, man. I said, we got a whole year to go through this PO. Surely we can sell them at cost. Surely to God, we can break even. So we got our first 2,000 boards in, and we put them on the website, and they sold out in 3 minutes.
Now,
it was
on
like,
y'all's end, though, right? So that's a big order for you guys. On your end, did that raise any red flags? You know, because if you're using it in a flashlight or general lighting, yeah, sure, maybe 100,000, a couple 100,000. Oh, yeah, that's normal Joe Blow customer. You know, but when guys that were in millions of things, were the guys upstairs at Samsung like, who are these people? Why do they need this many diodes?
What's strange? So going through a distributor, a lot of the times it's kind of blended in with all the rest of their demand, and so it's a lot harder to kind of piece out exactly what might be going on behind the curtain.
Okay.
But that's why you guys reached out originally, though, because I remember, I don't know, I think you were on the call because at the time you guys hadn't even come on the scene yet, right?
Yep.
And we were running them, and I don't remember if it was Arrow had kind of filled them in, and you guys called and said, hey, we're hearing you're using these things for grow lights, you know, like what, you know, and that's how I met these guys.
I mean, I would say that kind of defined HLG's name those times in headquarters, because we only had like 1 or 2 customers for horticulture, and then boom, HLG popped up, and everybody knew Steve and Amit pretty much, and we had calls, we met in Light Fair, and and then here we are.
Yeah. I might have actually gotten a little bit ahead of myself in the intro. What are your titles in the company,
Good question.
if you don't mind?
Sure. So I'm just sales for the Southeast.
Southeast sales. Okay, so you cover everybody. General lighting, horticulture, flashlight makers, whoever. Okay, cool. What about you, Ash?
I'm the senior field application engineer.
Oh, that's why you're answering all the technical questions.
Yeah, supporting Brock with his technical.
That's great. You guys are really, like, you guys deliver the 1-2 punch. Obviously, we've met several times and stuff like that, but yeah, it's a great combo. So moving on into, you know, we talked about the 561, we talked about a little bit of the evolution, how HLG kind of built themselves up as a customer to get your attention as a big player in the market and a leader and innovator and stuff like that. When was it that you guys started talking about development of products rather than, hey, we're Samsung, here's a product, you want to buy it? My understanding is that you kind of help curate the product that you ultimately would become the customer for. Is that true?
Yeah, so that was kind of one of the things that they reached out, and they were like, I'm an open book, for real. Right. So they were like, is there anything you would like to see? And I just started telling them, well, this is kind of my vision of where horticulture is going to go, and you see some guys maybe dabbling over here, but this is what I think, and we would just have these discussions all the time, and they would call back and say, guess what? We've got what you were wanting, do you want this? And it's like, well, yeah, send them. And I think it was when so we ordered that first 10,000 boards and burned through those. So the PO was a year, right? So we took our first delivery in November of 2017, and by February 2018, we were out. And so I was like, okay, now are you worried, Amit? He's like, this is the greatest idea. Amit. Yeah. So we really had started something. Well, it kind of, they'd come up with this 301 and said, well, check this out, this flip chip technology. And I looked into it and I really read up on it. And then we placed a direct PO with Samsung and said, let's just let them build the boards right now. And that's when the version 2, QB288 came out. And then I think it was probably just a little while after that, you guys came out with, under our kind of, you guys started developing a hyper red.
Yeah, it wasn't long until it was, Samsung was general lighting for the human eye, right. And I didn't see a lot of color, blues, red, whatever, and then all of a sudden you've got a 660 nanometer hyper red.
Well, that was kind of what they had asked me that, and I told them, I said, yeah, 660 and 450 is kind of the staple in grow lights. So if you want to be a player in the horticulture industry, you got to have a 450, you got to have a 660, and then from there we said, yeah, 730 for sure is one of those things you want, and then your white light, and then that's when the R spec came out. We become a customer of their reds, and that's kind of the evolution for HLG as we stuck with Samsung a lot of the way, Yeah.
And then on your end, were you guys doing in-house R&D, or were you kind of primarily partner with HLG, relying on them for the plant-specific in vivo studies and things of that nature?
Sure. So for specific plants, there's only so many plants that we can actually do R&D on in Korea ourselves. So cabbage, leafy greens, things like that, we can do those no problem all day, every day. But when it comes to the cannabis, the hemp, those type of things, yeah, we really relied on HLG and the grow houses they have over here to get plant-specific information, because it's one thing to say, oh, well, we got this much plant growth from cabbage under these lights, but I'm sure that the end customers, I'm sure most of the viewers here are going to want to know for the specific crops that they're growing. And so just having that extra data there to verify what we were seeing with all the rest of the leafy greens, really helpful.
I would say we're continuing to do that too now with certain wavelengths and certain new products that we talked about offline.
A lot of new stuff in the pipeline.
And
Yeah, I mean, we it's like the H Evo, for instance, which is something that I reckon HLG was the first company in the one of the first companies in the world to test them for sure, and we put them live into side by sides on everyone's favorite crop, and we saw an increase in flavonoids and cannabinoids and terpenes and things that everybody's looking for, and that was what we were looking for with that particular chip, and we did. I think we ended up building, and that's the good thing about doing SMT in-house is I snap in the computer and I change my recipe and bam, Clyde has this boards ready and we have fixtures by the end of the day. I mean, we literally can do that. So we had different percentages in different rooms and we could see exactly where we wanted to be. And that's when they really the H series, which is now the new H series, which is a 437 nanometer pump. That is what really defines. It's absolutely earth shattering in quality and production, but it's the first true white horticulture LED specific from the ground up, from the die up, if you will.
Can we put a pin in that briefly about going into the Evo and the cutting edge technology of today? I want to lay down a baseline for people. There's a lot of information, or I should say misinformation, on the internet about the grow lights. Obviously, LED grow lights have gotten extremely popular. They become kind of the mainstay. People are no longer upgrading. Well, people are still upgrading from, but a lot of people that are getting into horticulture for the first time, whether it be strawberries or cannabis, just go out and buy the LEDs. And what they see, oh, we're a Samsung partner on every eBay light, or it's got Samsung diodes. I mean, you guys have become. I don't want to make a stupid analogy here, but whatever the main component is, it's like you are synonymous with quality and performance. If you have Samsung diodes in your light, it's a good light. Right. But not everybody does, right? And then the other thing people say is, it's top bin. It's all top bin. Well, they can't all be top bin because explain the binning process to us, right? Help demystify binning. What is a top bin? What's a voltage bin or a flux bin or whatever?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, every LED has a blue dye in there for 50 nanometer, for 37, whatever the wavelength may be. The visual appearance is blue as you see there.
Is that because it's more efficient or something?
Yeah, it's kind of the sweet spot, but when we produce LEDs, there's always a bell curve, right? You can't always have, the best performing chips coming out of the production. There is a bell curve.
Just like height in humans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of short people, the average is the top of the bell curve, and then the tall people.
Imagine everyone was 6 foot. That would be great.
That'd be awesome.
But yeah. So there is some variation, and sometimes we do have to manage that. So if you look at the data sheet, there are 3 voltage bins, AY, AZ, and A1. Okay. And then there are 3 or 4 flux bins that you see. So the flux bins...
flux is the light output?
The light output coming out of the LED, and they often follow an alphabetical order. So let's say there's SL, there's SM. So the higher the alphabet, the better the light output out of the LED. Is every flux bin, is every product that uses Samsung, does it have the highest flux bin? I don't think so. But I can certainly say that, with HLG, they've always wanted to buy the best possible that we produce, and we've supported them. And you can see there's a lot of misinformation and, people use other LEDs and put our name on it. That's because we're we're really high performing, right? Our LEDs are really good, and that's why we're here, right? Not somewhere else. To reassure that HLG has been a great partner to Samsung, and anyone who wants to buy lights, talk to Steve or Brian, right? And they have our full backing.
Right on. I appreciate that, Ash. So I'm imagining at the Samsung factory, it in tenths or thousandths or hundredths of a second or whatever it is, you've got these 301B or H chips coming hot off the press, right? They're made maybe in some grid or whatever, right? And then some sophisticated machine energizes them, quickly measures the light of each individual diode and says, that's a bright one. That one's not so bright. Or, oh, that one's crazy bright, and says, okay, the crazy bright one, that's the top bin, right? And then as they're energizing it, it's like, well, how many volts does it take to juice it up? And low volts is good, right? Because that's less watts at the same current.
Yep.
Okay, so you're testing everything, every single diode, and then they're getting sorted by quality.
It's literally there's a reason why we call it binning, because it's literally put into bins.
Okay.
Right, each flux bin, each voltage bin, and then the best performing LED would be the lowest possible VF and the highest possible flux bin. That would have the highest light output and the highest lifetime.
Highest output, lowest volts. Because volts times current or amps equals watts.
Yes.
And if it's the higher output, but it's using less watts, that's even another degree.
Yep.
So I think a lot of people talk about top bin. They're just only talking about the flux or the output.
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly. But there's a whole nother dimension to this 4D chess out here. Or 3D chess. How many D's is chess? 3D chess out here. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah, so so the VF, just to get a little more technical into that, if I'm understanding it, it's the lower the VF, the higher the quality of the die, correct? So that means there's less micro fissures in the die, which is probably air gaps, and then that's why it takes less voltage to jump those air gaps. Am I thinking correct there?
You may be, but would they understand?
Oh, this is true. But yeah, so that was a question of mine, actually.
So if you pulled
it's in
each
my
diode
mind.
and put it under a microscope.
It's like looking at the quality of a diamond. You know what I mean? So these things are grown under a lot of pressure. Yeah,
yes, it's true to some extent. Yes.
Yeah. It's the same. So think about if you're familiar with construction at all. It's the same thing with concrete. Where there's a reason you don't use a lot of water in concrete if you can help it, because concrete doesn't shrink, right? So what happens to the water when it evaporates? Why did it get smaller? That means there's air now.
Okay.
And so that anytime you introduce air, it's going to be weaker. Similar situation. You're just that's why a stun gun's 50,000 volts. It can jump that far.
Yeah.
The finer those fissures, or there are no fissures, that means the current can flow with less voltage.
Okay.
Sure, but I mean, yes. But if you look at the 3 voltage bins that we have,
They're still on.
they are tight, but the distribution is even tighter. The what we publish in the data sheet is conservative, right? So it's never the full range in the bell curve. So
No, it's not. No, so that's the thing. So like on our SMT, we actually bin out the voltage bins by hand, and a lot of companies, they'll. So there's a few different bins and different things, but I've noticed that our VF is always like incredibly low, especially from the stuff Samsung makes for us too, and our LEDs we buy from Samsung. So we'll estimate by the data sheet, and we'll always be a full volt less. That means per LED we may be a tenth of a volt lower, or a 0.08 or 0.06 lower than what the data sheet would call out as your bell curve. So that's kind of one of those things that Samsung kind of does for us, is we always get like the best LEDs they got, and then and they scratch our backs because we scratch theirs sometimes, right? And that's
So
kind of
the
what,
importance there by you doing a third binning process is so that when you look at a quantum board that's got 16 strips or 20 strips, this strip isn't brighter than that strip, like parallel. That goes more into series parallel PCB design, which might be a whole episode on its own. That might require a dry erase board, and maybe that would be a good episode, to just show people the basics.
Future, yeah.
But anyway,
but
so
that lower voltage bin, maybe it can be considered as classified.
Classified. Okay, so you put those in a bin, you kind of slide them on the pallet that's got the HLG sign on it. So we are getting better stuff.
Yep.
We're getting preferred premium chips voltage and flux bin, we're able to order that stuff. Whereas maybe a smaller customer or an up and coming customer that's ordering from one of the many distributors would just not have that available on the order sheet to order. So, okay. So thank you. Thanks for demystifying that, because there's a lot of haters spilling the haterade out there, saying there's, so I heard one guy say, oh, top bin doesn't even exist. They're all top bin at this point. Which I guess in a way there might be some grain of truth to that, because doesn't your manufacturing process evolve over time and your yield gets better?
Yes, it has gotten better, but when you have a top bin, there's always a bottom bin.
Yeah.
Because what used to be a top bin is now not the top bin anymore. We go one level up, right?
Right. Because your machines and your process got so good, right?
Yep.
That now you're yielding above top bin. Like these are there are no fissures. The light output's 3% higher, whatever it is. So now you've got to invent another bin.
So once you do correct. So you can call the one bin lower as top bin, but maybe X top bin 6 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes HLG will even order custom bins there's just not enough of X coming off of the assembly line to support the demand. So we'll do a blend of imaginary bin that may not even exist and a blend of, well, this is on the data sheet, and then we're half a bin up even.
Yep.
Because there's just not enough to give, even us enough. If they just said, okay, we'll keep it all just for, say, HLG, they did a bidding process and $1,001, or whatever, and we did that. Well, it wouldn't matter because they still don't produce enough of those. But they say, well, there's enough of them laying around. If we put it in this way, we can support you, and then we can actually look at it that way.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that.
And the beauty of horticulture is that the lights are so bright that even if you mix two bins and you get to the desired output level, you can't tell the difference.
Right.
If you're in a architectural application, the diffuser is so close, and you can actually tell that you're mixing two bins, because like you said, when we measure when we measure the light output from production, it is visibly different, from top bin to the one below.
Sure.
But when you mix them, you don't get the highest, you don't get the lowest, you get a nice blend of both.
Okay.
That is right in between.
Right, and that's the other thing that HLG kind of did that was completely out of left field for Samsung, I think at the time, was, you have three-step binning when it comes to color bin, right? So you still have to color bins because the human eye can detect a very small difference in color correlated temperature, or CCT.
Yeah, I've seen that in a hotel, like with a wall wash like this, where the repairman accidentally put in a 4,000 Kelvin when the whole freaking thing's lit up 3K, and it's just like, you know what I mean? Like for guys like us, we see that, and we're like, no.
Yeah, maybe when I didn't get into the lighting market, I didn't quite bother about it, but now I see it every day, and it's like an occupational hazard.
You can't unsee it, right?
I can't unsee
it. You can't unsee it, yeah.
So we can probably even see 100 Kelvin difference.
Yeah, we can.
But I mean, when Steve says 3-step, 4-step, the way I would classify that is 3-step is 3 out of 10 people can actually tell the difference.
Okay.
2-step is 2 out of 10 people can tell. So the lower the step, the better the consistency. Fortunately, it's not been prevalent in the horticulture field yet.
Well, that's the reason I went the opposite direction. I said, I want you to spread out the steps. I don't care how far apart they look. I just want photons.
Yeah, it does not affect whether it's 2-step, 1-step, 10-step, it does not affect the efficacy or the light output of the LED.
No, and so when you open that up, it gives you the ability to say, okay, now you've opened up the steps here, maybe we can pick off enough to actually give you this flux bin here.
Okay.
And so that's because the plants ain't going to see the CCT difference. Nobody cares.
In fact,
honestly.
a wider CCT, what is CCT?
CCT is basically correlated color temperature.
Correlated, so we're matching the same color.
Yeah.
CCT.
So even though we call it warm white, cool white, the warm white looks a little bit yellow, cool white looks a little bit blue. They're all measured in temperature. Right? Kelvin. So you put a measuring tool and then you measure the temperature of that light coming out, and then we classify that as CCT.
Right.
The reason why it says color doesn't mean it's actually a color. It's actually a function of temperature.
Right. And so correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been years, but Kelvin is a unit just like Fahrenheit or Celsius.
Celsius, correct.
And it refers to the actual temperature of a flame. Like if it was 3,000 Kelvin, that flame, if it was that hot, would be that warm
Correct.
color.
Yes.
So like in the sun, something ultra hot, 5,000 kelvins, way hotter, the flame's blue, kind of like with a propane torch or something. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's the origin of the unit and its application to LED
Right,
color.
and the thing with CCT, and this is something was a little bit of quite a bit of misinformation out in the industry as well, is plants don't care about CCT one bit. So the reality is they care about red, blue, green ratios. So you can come to a CCT and have similar red, blue, green ratios that are totally different. Right, because so your red lands at 620 nanometer instead of 660 nanometer. Well, the human eye can see 620 much better, or is much more sensitive to that than it is a 660, probably a magnitude of 2. So you could have the same exact amount of red photons, which would drive photosynthesis crazy, do really good, and that 660 would not warm that CCT up like that 620 would. So it could be cool white LEDs with 660 versus cool white LEDs with 620, and the plant's response would be the same, and the color would totally look amazingly different to the human eye.
Sure.
But it would drive photosynthesis and excite all your chlorophylls and all that very similarly.
It's like following Google Maps or Waze, 2 different routes, but you get to the same spot, right?
Right. So that's why when you hear people say, oh, 3,000 Kelvin's too warm or 5,000 Kelvin's too cool, it has zero to do with horticulture at the end of the day. Zero.
It
And
matters
that's
when you're
reality.
in an office space, but
Yes.
not really.
That's it. It's a
Yeah.
very much just the same as lumens. It's a very human-centric measurement.
Yeah.
So
So that's interesting. So throughout the manufacturing process, I remember a time where top bin 301Bs were not obtainable. I mean, they weren't obtainable by me. Maybe Steve could get them before I started the company, but they're just the machines weren't yielding enough. And then it kind of got to the point where the machines might be yielding mostly top bin or whatever, maybe even above top bin. And now you've got this outlier that really probably doesn't have a value, right? Because you have to fit within your spec sheet. Spec sheets are there, manufacturing guidelines are there. You got this thing that's outside of it. You throw it to Steve to do the research. Well, what happened with the 301H situation? Because a lot of people were confused. They thought that 301H was some specific horticulture diode or maybe a different formula, or what's the difference there?
It is different now.
It is now. And by now, do you mean in the last 12 months, 24 months?
I'd say maybe 24 months. In the very beginning, when we first launched with the B and the H original 301H was essentially, not even essentially, it was a 301B.
Okay.
It was just a different way for us to classify it, just so that we could track what's the horticulture demand for these parts.
Okay.
As that grew and grew, the need arose to, okay, let's really zero in and let's get a focused part specifically for horticulture. Let's get a specific part for horticulture that addresses the unique needs for plants as opposed to lighting a room for people.
Okay, so in the early days, let's say, 2018, 19, and possibly even early 2020, all the 301H was a tracking metric for the guys upstairs to say how many are selling here, how many are selling general lighting.
They
And that's
were the
it.
same price and everything.
Same price and everything.
And I had that argument over and over. Like, no, it's the same part. It's
Well,
just
there's still
tracking.
that argument going on today and 6
Well,
months, 24 months
Yeah.
later.
So now, though, the 301H today is a totally different product because it's a 437 pump instead of 450. So it is a horticulture-specific LED that is totally different. It's a difference. So it's a totally different phosphorus mix, custom blended specific to that 437 nanometer starting photon. So your photon lose a little bit off energy off each electron. Now you got a longer wavelength.
Yeah, so I would say we have 4 products right now. The first is it's the parent, the 301B, where it all started, and then the 301H, where we specifically segregated it for logistic reasons, as you mentioned. What's evolved now? I say evolved because we call the new LED as Evo, right?
Okay.
So you have the 301B, 301H, which we're all clear about right now.
Yes.
And then we have the 301B Evo.
Actually, do you mind if we pause for a
Sure.
quick second?
Yeah.
So as of around 24 months ago, 301H became its own separate product. Inherently a different product than B. And you referenced earlier that, the base chip of 450 nanometer royal blue is 301B today. But now today it's a different base.
So the 301H is also the 450 nanometer. It's the same thing.
Okay.
The wavelength would change when you put an Evo name next to it.
So now we have a third product that is a horticulture more specific product called the Evo.
Called H Evo.
H Evo.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I just want to be like super duper crystal clear because we might not have this opportunity.
I remember it might have been called the next big thing one time, and it was all kinds of. We talked about the next big thing, and they can laugh about it. But so I mean, so that's the cool part for us is we've been in this process, and we've heard iterations of names until they landed on the names. Or like we don't even know what it is, but it's this. This is how it's made. Test it for us while we come up with a name. Okay, Put it up over at Flow Gardens and let her fly.
I see a piece of masking tape over at Samsung with just like a handwritten name during development or something like that.
Yeah, we didn't get a barcode.
That's actually true.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. Cool. So you referenced so now we have the H Evo, which in lieu of a 450 nanometer traditional royal blue, it's 13 nanometers less, 437. So that's going higher energy, more towards like UVA. Correct. Is that way.
Yes.
Okay. And so why?
Yeah. So first, more photons out of it,
Okay.
and then with that particular nanometer, of course, we did our trial and error with multiple wavelengths, and we kind of decided that it's our sweet spot. And based on the research that we've done, it kind of prevented, microbial activity, like what could harm a plant.
Sure.
Right.
So it's a higher energy photon.
Because it's
slightly
closer to the UV.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons. So on a 21-day cycle, we found more benefits to it other than the efficacy improvement that we've seen. Yeah. And we decided that would be our sweet spot.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense because, higher you get into UVA, UVB, UVC. You go to UVC, that's a germicidal lamp in a commercial kitchen.
Yep.
So you take the energy level of the photon higher, now you're exciting things in any plant's electron transport chain, terpenes, secondary metabolites. So you've got this built-in little kind of micro UV. I don't want to say micro UV, but it's kind of in that direction, right?
That's it. I mean, so I think with us, we felt like we were kind of on the cutting edge of yield, right? So as far as what an LED will do, because we had the most photons coming out per watt and very similar wattage fixtures to everyone else, so that we would be kind of the yield leaders. Now it's like, okay, so in the market you saw more and more states come online, things going around. So what differentiates your product? It's the same thing, like you could look at craft beer as a great example. Everybody's got a Budweiser, right? But when you have a really good craft beer, now you can get more for that 6-pack. You see what I mean? Yeah. So now you've got to play the game of I want the yield and I want the quality, and I don't want it to cost me much to run. Right. Now that separates you into a class of winners when the pond gets more full of ducks competing for the same food. You know what I'm saying? True story.
Most Tennessee.
I mean, yeah, and
yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I have to say, HLG really hit the home run with it, like, because we released the product, the 437, but they did something unique with it, which I don't want to really, for the people who are watching, talk to Steve.
Okay.
Right. So they created a unique spectrum out of it, not just using the H Evo. So that showed a lot of benefits in the HLG grow rooms, and that's one of the things that Samsung headquarters saw, and they're like, wow, this is amazing. Yeah. What they've done with the spectrum, and we wouldn't have thought of that.
Well, as I look at spectral distribution graphs, and that's another area of a lot of misunderstanding, because people manipulate the axes. The x-axis isn't really manipulated because, you've got 400 to 700 nanometers, right, give or take. But the y-axis, the relative power and the ratios you're talking about, people manipulate that. They squish it down. Some people extend it up to make their peaks look bigger. Yep. And customers don't know any better. They don't know how to look at it. And I think that you're onto something with the green, red, blue ratio represented as a pie graph as honestly being more important and more relevant than an SBD that's manipulated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But where
And-
I'm going with this is I noticed the evolution of HLG products, were looking very similar to many other products where you have a fairly sharp peak in the 450 nanometer range. Now I'm seeing that peak just slightly widen out. So, we call it the double pump.
Yeah.
So where does that come from? Is that mixing stuff up, getting in the lab, getting crazy?
That's mixing stuff up, and we have other prioritory things working to just keep flattening that curve. That's the big thing. Is it's at the end of the day, we don't necessarily want to mimic the sun 100%, because a lot of people will. I won't say a lot of people, but there are some people that would believe that if you mimic the sun's spectrum, regardless of photon efficacy, that it's going to win, but that's not the case. So the goal is to get closer and closer to what the plants have evolved under for hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, all while doing as efficiently as possible. So there's this, there's this kind of, I guess it's like, point of diminishing returns. Do you get way off and you just have so name drop, Rob and them, have you been seeing, some of these red and blue LEDs that have no green, at all, and it's bleaching the plants. So apparently you can go too far away from the sun spectrum that the plant literally can't function correctly, like it can't produce chlorophyll anymore, right? As fast as it's being oxidized. Or you can go to plasma. So you remember the plasma lamps, and that was going to be the next big thing. Well, those things had an incredible spectrum that's very similar to the sun, because what is the sun? You know what I'm saying? It's similar. Well, the problem was they were like 1.1 micromolars per joule. So, now you got the sun spectrum, but you got no real light, So you try to get there as much as you can, but you got to keep that efficacy high. And that's kind of the transition that we're making. We're trying to push both envelopes simultaneously. Better spectrum that the plant is more and more adapt to, because we're learning especially with our favorite plant in general, the more chemically complex a plant, the more spectrum does matter. You take lettuce, and lettuce will grow pretty good with red and blue LEDs with just a little dust and a green. But you take our favorite plant, and it's not going to be happy in that environment, So it's the more chemically complex, the more secondary pigments and metabolite, everything is just totally different and more complex. So
basically, you're saying that the highest efficacy does not mean the best spectrum. You need to have a balance of both.
You have to have a balance. Yep.
And I would say that there was a number of years there where I was in the school of thought where if a light or an engineer or prototyper could mimic the sun's graph perfectly, that was the perfect grow light. But then I kind of had the epiphany or the realization that when things are free, like if there's a table of free drinks or free candy or free beer, you drink half of it, you just set the empty can on a table, whatever, right? But when you got to pay for something, you want to get every last drop of it,
Sure.
Right? So the sun's free. The sun has the luxury of potentially being wasteful. Also, the sun has to support, I don't know how many species of plants there are. I know there's like 384,000 species of beetle in the rainforest alone, but plants, I don't know. I mean, a couple tens of thousands, whatever it is. But the sun's got to support all of those, right? So I kind of reject the notion that the sun's the perfect spectrum for this plant or that, because
they've all evolved under it is the thing I'm
sure,
thinking.
Sure, evolved to survive and possibly proliferate.
And maybe under epigenetics, you could look at that. Maybe now the sun isn't the most perfect spectrum. It just happens to be here. Maybe whales eating krill is fine. Maybe they like ribeyes better. We don't know.
You never know.
They just sit and swim around, and they weren't there, so we don't know yet.
Well, the one other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is the thermal management. We talked about the chip on boards early in the episode, I should say. Amazing, simple product. We talked about the downside to not being able to mix the flavors too much. You got 3,000 or 4,000, whatever the case may be, right? So these mid-power diodes come on the scene, and all of a sudden, I'm seeing lights manufactured without big, giant, spiky heat sinks and fins and fans and all that stuff. So Ash, can you talk a little bit about like the thermal management of the chip itself? Sure. In the mid powers?
Sure.
Because these are like 0.3 of a watt, or what are we talking here?
Yeah. So the Well, the first thermal management technique comes from the manufacturer, right? What kind of technology we use, and we talked about the flip chip being, the more efficient LED with a lower thermal resistance. So
And a lower thermal resistance is good
yeah, good,
because it gets the heat away faster.
right, and for people to understand, right? People are familiar with COB, and there's a lot of bond wires, and there's a lot of chips in there. Heat goes two ways. Heat emits from the bond wire from the top side, and then heat goes into the heat sink below the LED, right? But when it comes to a flip chip, which is the 301B, heat only goes one way for the most part. It goes down into the PCB, and that's what flip chip offers when compared to an LED that has typically a bond wire.
Okay.
So it starts there, and then it takes the right amount of heat sinking to the fixture. Like if you look at HLG's fixture Diablo, you have a metal core PCB
Yep.
that Samsung builds for HLG, which can be classified. Sorry.
That's all right.
No, it's fine. No,
it's-
everyone knows we buy from
They do.
Samsung
Okay.
as well.
All right.
We do
so
a blending
yeah.
approach.
So the metal core aluminum plate under the PCB that helps, and then that's attached to the HLG fixture, which is also a piece of big metal, right? Depending on the fixture. So that really helps to get the heat out.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say it starts from the flip chip, flows all the way to the HLG's housing.
Okay. That's cool. Okay, so I never knew that. I mean, because when I was building chip-on-board LEDs, I used to have these blankets from Harbor Freight. And, I used to do my stuff clean, dude. I would powder coat it or, triple candy gloss paint. That's how I wanted the videos for it to look good. I'd lay them down on that blanket and I'd test fire them. They would burn freaking holes in the blanket. I even have a blanket that's got 20 perfectly even spaced holes in it from the COBs, burning through.
That was actually from the actual photons turning into heat.
Okay.
So, but the light emitted the energy itself, right?
Sure.
So one of the things, and Ash can correct me if I'm wrong, is the difference between flip chip and epi up can be a lot of times like, these mid powers are, of course, they're made out of plastic, right? So you have a mid power, you have a die in there with a flip chip. You have a pathway right off the chip straight to the PCB because because there are no bond wires. But when you sit your chip in there and you run bond wires, there's a layer of plastic between the chip itself and the board. Well, here's your problem. Plastic is not a good thermal conductor at all. Yeah. So it
in
holds
other manufacturers.
So the 5630 was.
Okay.
That was a epi up.
Right.
So what happens is that LED is relying on those little bond wires to get a lot of that heat out and draw it off that die, and it's sitting in a bed of insulation. Now that you've made a flip chip, that die is actually attached to the PCB, which is copper, which just happens to conduct heat and electricity absolutely wonderfully for the cost, and now it's drawing that heat off much quicker. And so you can even see that with Samsung, what they did different. And I remember I saw it, and I was like, the footprint has kind of changed on the board, what they recommend.
The footprint where the diode sticks to the metal
so if you
board.
look at it, there's something called a serpentine footprint, right?
A butterfly footprint,
Yeah.
as they call it.
Okay. So we called it serpentine for a while. Now it's butterfly. Okay, cool. But anyway, so I'm like, I get it. So you don't just have these two big blanks. You have a pathway to get that heat off that die as quickly as possible. Yeah. And I told Ahmed, I said, man, they really thought about this.
Yeah. I remember the first time I saw that because I was at a different company and I was placing diodes and stuff. And most diodes have two stripes, an anode, a positive and a negative. It's just two lines. And then, they solder to the board. But the 301Bs are all like butterfly. It was just a lot more space and material and surface area. So that's just got to
exactly.
suck the heat away.
Yeah, but the landing pattern on the PCB is pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
So we really thought this through, and there was a bunch of trial and error involved with that footprint. There may or may not have been a 301B with a regular footprint, right? And we found that this would be the best to get the heat out, like Steve said.
Yeah, I mean, at one time, we were so early in the game that we were making PCBs one way per their recommendation from the data sheet, and then it changed to this.
Yep.
So we were that early in the game that they were still figuring out the footprint that was best to get the thermals off, but both worked great.
Yeah.
But they were figured out this footprint because at one time we'd actually match that butterfly to the board, which turned out if you weren't using a really, really great machine, it was hard to place it dead on it.
Yeah.
Lucky for me and the stars, in reality, I just happened to run into somebody because I didn't know Panasonic even made this equipment, right? So I run into Dennis Yingling because I'd been looking at Juki and we went up to this show at the end of January, and I saw the original I was looking at. It was called the Puma. It was belt driven, bro. I was going to buy a belt driven SMT machine, and I said, Ahmed, I think this will handle it. At the time, we'd sold just a few, maybe a few thousand boards. That was a joke. It would have handled our capacity for about 2 weeks. By the time it got there, it would have been like obsolete. I was like, so we bought the cat. So the one we ended up buying is what the iPhone's built on today.
Wow.
And it's an absolute beast. So it's what Denso uses, which is one of the biggest SMT guys in the country.
Yeah, and a little bit of a fun fact about flip chip, it's used in Samsung TVs too.
Oh,
So-
sweet. Well, we're representing for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Exactly.
You brought up some interesting points, Ash, that might help dispel like a common myth. I see people on the internet always saying like, this LED light runs way hotter than this 600 LED light runs way hotter than this 600 watt LED light. And I would contend that, based on many of the reasons you talked about thermal management, if you put your hand on the top of a LED light, 600 watts, and it's cold, that's a bad thing. That means all that heat's probably hanging out in the PCB or maybe in the chips themselves. Don't you want the heat? You want the heat getting into the heat sink. You want to feel some temperature, don't you?
There's a couple things you can think about there. So when we go back to Stokes' law, what we're doing is you start out, remember that 450 or 437 nanometer pump. Yep. So you got this photon, hits phosphorus, the electrons lose a little bit of energy, you get that longer wavelength, right? So the warmer that CCT is, the same number of a close number of photons can still come out. So your micromoles per joule can be the same, but a lot more energy was lost because you have lighter on energy photons coming out, like red. You see what I'm saying?
So the bluer you want to make it,
the cooler the fixture
cooler
will run.
Because
there's less conversion.
The warmer you want to make it, the more filtering, the more conversion, the more heat is trapped in the converter or the filter.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have that energy is lost, and now becomes what? Heat.
Okay.
And so that was some of the reason that we also looked at cooling off the LEDs and looking at this red, blue, green ratio is now we can make these things, when you fill our fixtures, and Scorpion Diablo runs like 12 or 13 C over ambient, which is absolutely groundbreaking. Yeah. So when you look at that and you say, okay, what does that do for me? Well, we already underdrive the chips a lot. So the LM data, when we're talking about how long those LEDs are going to last before they reach their end of useful life, like by output diminishment, it's already even at 85C, they're going to last. You will take it down and throw it away because something new will be out way before it would be down to 90% output.
People are complaining about that. I wish my light would fail. I wish my HLG light would fail so I could buy the new one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I see that all the time.
Yeah.
That's a good problem to have. Buddy.
Yeah, but
they can buy a new one irrespective.
Sure.
Yeah.
eBay or Facebook Marketplace it.
Yeah. So when you look at that, and then you say, okay, now I've lowered the temperature to this unbelievably cool temperature. You're losing what, 0.1, 0.2% output per year? It's nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the point. So unlike an HPS grow, so when you hear a guy, I just changed my bulb with just under a reflector and I'm hitting this many pounds per light. Okay. I want you to run that until you go to change bulbs again. Now give me an average. Here's the difference. Your yield's not going to change from crop 1, crop 2, crop 3, crop 4, even through crop 60 10 years from now.
On an LED.
On an LED, you're going to see a 3% difference, 5% difference tops. That's where HLG LEDs really stand out. During break, we were talking about, looking at different LEDs themselves. So that segues into what we call the cheaper LED section, right?
Well, actually, Steve, before you go there, I did want to, you brought up something that sparked my interest, which is diminishing returns. You talked about running the LED soft,
Yeah.
right? Which means, correct me if I'm wrong, Ash, but a 301H or Evo or some 3 millimeter by 3 millimeter Samsung chip can take to get, they're rated at like what, 0.3 watts at full power, right? And to get that full power, you got to run them at like 200
milliamps.
200 milliamps, okay, which is sort of maxing it out. That's cranking it to 11, right?
Yes.
But nobody does that because, well, it's less efficient to run anything. It's less efficient to run the car in the red line. That's why you shift gears, right? So you said running them soft. So you're running them less than 200 milliamps.
Right. So it's kind of priority, but anybody with a calculator can figure it out anyway. But QB648 on Scorpion Diablo 2.0 is running at about 54 milliamps.
So
which
one quarter the strength, max strength.
So test current, which means what Samsung will light them up and tell you your lumens per watt is 65 milliamps.
Okay.
So we're running below test current. So we're running really soft. There is a point that you get so soft though that it actually is a point of diminishing returns. Am I correct on that, Ash?
Correct.
So when you get down into the really low milliamps, I don't know if it's the voltage that would drop because that you end up, your micromoles per joule would start going backwards.
Can you provide any insight to the diminishing returns on these diodes as to a why? Or why wouldn't a guy want to just come off the street? And this guy or girl or whoever is not an engineer or not really even an expert. They just called up China and said, hey, China, make me a light like this one and just put a bunch more diodes on it so I can say it's way more better. Like, why is that a bad thing? In terms of diminishing returns and running the diodes softer than the engineers had accounted for.
You can jog for a lot longer than you can sprint if you're trying to get somewhere, but the diminishing return would be, well, if you do need to get there at a certain time, if you were to do a baby walk, you're gonna miss your deadline.
And scrape up your knees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's like in the 30s. Is it in the 30s milliamps range that you don't really see a gain?
Yeah, I would say more of a 25 milliampere. Yeah,
25.
Because well, I didn't want to get too technical, but here I am. But so the die needs a certain amount of current to be productive, right? Just like you need a certain amount of food to fill your stomach.
Okay.
If that's an analogy. So
to get the entire die excited.
Entire die excited.
Okay.
And the entire die has
Because there's
to be,
chemistry involved here.
Yeah.
There's chemicals that need electricity to get excited.
Yep. Okay. Correct. So yeah, you have to feed the beast.
Feed the beast.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the thing, when you get down in these 20s and 30 milliamps, the thing is the difference is so minor.
Right.
It's so minor. If I ran these LEDs at 25 milliamps, I wouldn't gain a 10% efficacy like I would from going from 200 to 100 milliamps.
Correct.
Okay.
It's it's probably almost immeasurable. It's there, but it's
So
probably
that's the
very,
true
very-
definition of diminishing returns. You get the biggest impact by going from 200 to 100.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then another big impact from 100 to 50.
55.
And then from 50 to 25, you're down in that. Gnat's,
Yeah, maybe
gnat's butt.
you'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if it was a single percent at that point.
So if we wanted to make
I
our
don't know.
lights better and we doubled the diode count and potentially doubled the cost to the customer, we might get a couple.
I don't think you get as much. That's not a productive way of doing it.
Right
Yeah,
on.
you need
Might as
to
well just buy
find-
another light, have two lights.
So you need to find the right sweet spot, irrespective of what LED it is. And, the sweet spot for different LED is different. For the 301B, like Steve mentioned, it's around the range that he mentioned there.
Yeah,
Sweet.
55. Yeah, that's
50
what I'm saying.
55
I've done a lot-
milliamps.
I've done a lot of research. It's just it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Cool.
I mean, yeah, it also depends on what type of heat sink it being used. You could have like a thin, flexible board or fixture, and you could drive it at 55 milliamp, and the LEDs would run hot.
Okay.
So it's a combination of combining it with the right heat sink,
Okay.
even
Right.
at 55.
So
Now,
I mean,
if I'm really budget limited and just have some like aluminum foil laying around, what drive current would you suggest?
Zero.
zero.
Don't do that.
one milliamp.
1 milliamp. Okay.
But you can also look at there's so much that people don't really understand that goes into when we design these fixtures, even at the board level, so much thought is put into it. That thermal management, you have a dielectric layer. So you got to think about. So you got this thermal. So you got here's your copper, here's your LEDs. Well, what's keeping them from shorting out? There's a dielectric layer.
Yep.
Well, if it's electrically insulative, so's a 2x4.
Oh, so you got your aluminum base. Then
Yep.
there's something else like wood or plastic or something that's going to block the current from the copper where the LEDs go to. So you got the dielectric, and there's some technology there as far as
there's technology there
In the
so
PCB.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the more money you spend there on the dielectric layer, the more you can get the heat to quickly go from the copper, which is still could become your bottleneck, is that middle ground.
So it's like having a super high horsepower car with crappy tires.
Exactly. So every layer of our fixtures are very much planned out, and that goes into, maybe we can go into the buyer's, what you're looking at when you buy an LED.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's the big thing that people don't realize is they say, oh man, no, I can get the same performance. We had comments on Migro's video about, oh, you can get that same light from China for $350. Dude, I pay more than $350 for the LEDs themselves before they are even peeled off the reel. I don't believe you.
So what are some insights we could provide? Because Ash, you brought up a good point during break. I mean, if you see an item, I was shopping for, I don't own a dog, but I was shopping for dog nail trimmers because they're scissors that go like that, right?
Sure.
And you can imagine when cutting a stem like this, you might pinch it. But if you cut it like a cigar, it might be cleaner cut. So my first thing was I looked in Amazon. There's a one with 50,000 reviews, and it was like $9 or something, right? And then there's another one, and so I ordered it. And there's another one that's $12.99 with 400 reviews. So a couple orders of magnitude less. Which one do you think was better when I got it? Which one do you think had a cleaner cut?
Well, you would think it's the $9, right? Because
With 50,000 reviews?
Yeah, with 50,000 reviews, and it works for a day or two. But how many people go back and change the review after it fails after a week?
Like 2, 0.
Right? So yeah, so that I would, like I always say, I've been guilty of doing this, but since I'm in this industry, I've learned to like really scan the products that I look at, especially when it comes to like changing fixtures at my home, or anything else. So the product with the highest review is not necessarily the best one, right?
Yeah.
The product with the best technology is the best one.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to one particular competitor of ours and their Amazon store, and if you start looking through, it's like, oh man, they must be much better than HLG. They have 18 times the reviews. Start digging into those reviews. Go to page 7. It was hangers for the lights. They were selling rope ratchets. So all the reviews except for the last 2 or 3 pages are rope ratchet reviews. They changed the product to the light, and rope ratchet's a rope ratchet. Yeah, they lifted my light up and down for $10. Everybody gave a 5-star review, and then they stuck the LED light on there and used that product's pumped up numbers, and it gets that. And it's rope ratchets.
Dude, thumbnail face right now.
Go. So that's the thing. So
oh my gosh, that's so sneaky.
So every time I look at something on Amazon now, like he's talking about, I zoom in on the product.
Yep.
I try to really get a feel, do I think this is it? Because like you said, you can find 1,000 pairs of trimming scissors on Amazon for $8. And you got to really look at the blades and think, is this really the pair?
Yep.
Which that's why I always buy Fiskars, because it's like, it's $20, but you know what? They work. Yeah. And they don't give me arthritis.
Fiskars did switch from the nitrile gold coating to some black anodized coating. It's
when
not
did they do
nearly as
that?
good. Pretty recently. But they offer a lifetime warranty on the scissors. So save your pack. If you buy Fiskars still, save the packaging. It says limited lifetime warranty. Their new coating's garbage. But
what?
Sorry, I don't mean to. I don't mean to.
I lose everything.
I know. Actually, you know who makes a good scissor? HLG.
Hey, we did. I did my homework on those. So we get those.
What are you talking about? I single-handedly selected design and ordered the scissors.
You did, I guess so. I took credit for that, didn't I? I did.
You did.
Shame on me. But I did. I will say I came up with not even. Was it the trimming scissors?
You see, I'm not.
No,
even
it's
surprised.
the sunglasses that I did.
The sunglasses are dope too.
Yeah.
So what are some visual cues?
Cut. No. But,
What are some visual cues that guys and gals and people that are ordering lights could do to say, hey, they're saying this is Samsung. Is it Samsung or not? Just short of grabbing a flathead and popping the diode, looking for the butterfly stuff. You know, like is there any visual cues you guys could think of? I know there's like a little triangle on the corner of the diodes if you look at them close.
I mean, with the 301B,
Yeah.
right? The 301B, 301H, anything that's flip chip.
Yep.
If you're Ash and you want to be an engineer, call the company and ask them, is this flip chip? Because flip chip's the best.
Okay.
That's what I want on my grow lights. You know, that keeps the heat out. You know, it's more reliable against harsh environments.
Okay.
But if you can't make the call, look at the LED. The 301B, 301H series, the die is always square.
It's always square.
It's not a rectangle, it's a single die. You see the yellow phosphor and you see something inside, which is a single die and a square.
Okay.
Anything else has two dies inside,
Okay.
and it's in a rectangular shape.
Aha.
So-
So you've got a little, maybe a jeweler's loop or something. You're
Yep.
looking down
Yep.
on the die through the yellow phosphor
Yep.
into the die itself.
Correct.
And it's always a square.
oh my
Yep.
goodness.
Interesting.
Think about how long it's been since we started looking at 301. I don't know if you remember the dual phosphor ones.
I remember those. It was like a multicolor rainbow inside.
Yes,
And
the
it was
orange,
like-
orange in the center, which
Yeah.
was like a 3K, and then it had the yellow phosphor to blend on the outside. And
It was one of the first.
that's what I'm saying. I knew we were in there. But another thing you can do a lot of times to verify that you have the right 301s, that you have the genuine article, at least a Samsung flip chip, is the way that those bond wires are presented on the outside of that die. So when you look at the diode, you'll see 4 little tabs, where a lot of 3030s will have 2 elongated tabs.
Correct.
And that's the difference.
So on the diode itself.
When you look at the very outside, you'll see 4 little
Okay.
silver tabs instead of 2 long ones. A lot of your generic 3030s will have long ones.
Okay.
So that's a good way to tell as well.
So long, what looks like little strips of solder or metal on the
Yes,
side
yes.
is not Samsung.
That's not Samsung. You'll just see 4 little shiny dots pretty much,
Okay.
which are the only part of the footprint that is exposed outside of the LED.
Okay. When looking through the phosphor, and you'll need a jeweler's loop probably to get down
Well,
in
no,
there.
you won't look through the
I mean,
phosphor. This is on the outside of the white
Oh, that
package
part is.
itself.
So that's number one.
Yeah, I mean, you can take a phone and you can. Just
Oh, yeah, the
zoom
phone.
in,
I
so-
forgot about technology. Yeah.
Especially that new S23 Ultra with the 200 megapixel camera.
Oh, that thing can shoot the moon. Like,
no
literally.
kidding. I mean, you're going to see it.
Yeah. Okay, so grab your phone, ultra zoom. You're looking for a single square die right in the center, not 2 individual dies and not a rectangle.
Correct.
Right? Okay, that's 2 amazing ways. I guess a third way would be to get a sharp object and pop it off the the board and look for that butterfly, connectors or whatever.
I forgot all about those scissors. You know why?
Why?
Because you left me.
That's right. It was
He
my
left
last contribution.
We were engaged,
It was my
and he
last
left.
contribution.
And it was he just in and out of my life.
Oh man, that's awesome, guys. So we have covered so much today. I mean, man, I can't thank you all enough. Last week I said I was privileged, but thank you. Sincerely for making the time, drive down here, and having your stamp of approval and having your insights and verification. I think is really valuable to our audience and the consumer as well. And whether you're buying an HLG product or not, you've got a couple useful tips that you can look at these eBay lights and these Amazon lights and see, if it's been represented properly.
Absolutely.
So, valuable service.
Yeah, these guys have really supported us all the way through from the very beginning, basically of our journey almost, and we really appreciate everything they do and glad to have them. And after the show, I'll be sure to put up each one of their personal cell phone numbers so you can call them with any other questions or comments.
Ash's phone will be blowing up with Amazon verification questions. Hey man, can I shoot you this pic?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd
No
be
doubt.
awesome, dude.
As long as y'all are paying me.
Yeah, there you go. So I would imagine it would take a long time to develop, new products. I mean, the Evo is fresh off the presses. Nobody even knew the name of the Evo until Steve opened his big mouth, and then everybody knew the name of it. But I would imagine, HLG and Samsung will continue to work together to develop future iterations of this product and others.
And we are, yep.
Yeah.
And you are?
As we speak.
Yeah, we have other things in the pipeline, and not to steal from Arrow, but we're not quite 5 years out, but we're a year or two out always. So anytime we release something, the wheels are spinning, but it, just like any car manufacturer, phone manufacturer, anything, you're R&Ding and it's evolving, right? So the good thing that when you buy an HLG product is at least that you're funding a company that's actually trying to push the envelope and do better for the industry as a whole. Because let's face reality, before us, who did independent lab results and third-party verified and put them out there? I mean,
hard to tell. Nobody was putting them out there. No one was
Right.
publishing them. They were stuffing them in the top drawer of their desk.
Yeah, exactly. They were doing that, and before us, who talked about the chip technology? Anybody that actually had a decent grow light sure didn't talk about what they were using.
No.
And so that's kind of been our MO is let's educate the people on what they're buying, and if other people copy us or claim what they're doing, it costs us in the end of the day. Maybe mom is better at the end of the day, but I want to see the whole industry do better, because eventually, as we know, I'm definitely not a tree hugger, but climate change probably may be a little real, and overpopulation's a real threat. So what do we got to do? We've got to push this technology to where we can get to vertical farming is very, very feasible, and we've got to, and let's face reality too. I like a fresh salad that's produced right down the street if I can have it, because it is much better.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, the end consumer wins, and that's a better quality of life, and that's what I aim for.
I agree. It's good ethos. The hidden ethos behind HLGs to get good fresh lettuce on the daily.
Well, and other kinds of lettuce.
And other kinds of lettuce. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. Thanks again.
Thanks
we really
for having
appreciate
us.
it.
No,
Good to see you guys again. And thank you, everybody, for watching and stay until the end. I hope you found some of these tips useful and helpful. We'd encourage you to buy HLG products. As you know, we've been Samsung partner forever, and you can see we've kind of verified a lot of the inconsistencies that have been out there on the internet. But if you don't, you got some stuff that you can use to, maybe check your Amazon Lite or your eBay Lite if that's what you're going with.
Dude,
I lost my train of thought in the outro, so you're going to see a brief jump cut there. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you guys next week.